What's up, everyone? This is the Nuts and Bolts Podcast, and I'm your host, the one James, here with our amazing co-hosts, Airball.
Hey, everyone.
And Michael Gritz.
What it do?
And we're here to give you the nuts and bolts of the standard and pioneer, maybe sometimes modern, formats each and every week. But first, let me talk to you about the sponsor of this podcast, CoolStuffInc.com. Using code JAMES5, you can save 5% off of anything in the store. Sealed product, singles, anything you could ever need in Magic the Gathering. They have it. Any other card game as well. Go save yourself some hard-earned money and go to CoolStuffInc.com today. Let's start off with our upkeep. Jargon today is Dead Card, a card in hand that is irrelevant or unplayable. This may also be expressed with the phrase Dead Draw if the card was just drawn from the deck. This is, I guess you can give me, Airball, a very awesome example, because there's a lot of dead draws in your deck when there's in your control deck, when your opponent has a huge board and you're like, I just need a sweeper just one time, and you draw a counter spell.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely been in control mirrors before where my hand is just a bunch of board wipes and some targeted removal, and that's it. And those are all dead, and it's like I didn't draw my hand for the game.
Michael, with your Rakdos gang, you're like, okay, just need one last creature off the top to beat this control deck. Any creature wins me the game. Duress.
Oh, I've been there. That's painful. been there. Or your control opponent already is in their late game, so they have a board and they don't have any cards in hand to even duress. You're like, sick. Real fun.
You duress, and they have all creatures and lands. And you're like, interesting. How did your control deck morph into a creature deck? No clue. But that was a dead card. I don't like
talking about this. This is PTSD. Let's move on.
You're like, wow, blue eye control, I duressed you, and you have all Dream Trawlers. Sick hand.
Oh god. It's my nightmares.
Like you duress your control opponent, and this has happened to me before, where their hand was like all lands, Dream Trawler, Lyra. I'm like, no.
Yeah, they hit you with the nice, and I just hit concede. Like, I'm good here. We're done.
The look of satisfaction on Airball's face when that happens, sticking your tongue out. Okay, we're going to move on to the main phase. I'm super excited to talk about this today. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the top 5 Phyrexia all be 1 cards, and we all have each a different 5, and we're going to go from Airball to Michael to me, and they're all different in a cool way. We have a couple honorable mentions as well, so let's just start off talking about the honorable mentions before anything. We have the fast lands, a cycle of them coming into standard. I mean, are already in standard, and some of them introducing into Pioneer, like Blackleaf Cliffs and things like that, which Rakdos midrange, I guess it needed an upgrade, and it got one. And we have Copperline Gorge, so green, red, aggro decks in standard get a little bit of a buff. We have a few other ones as well, so it makes the 2 and 3 color mana super good for some and super bad for others. I was playing a Simic deck today, and we don't have the Simic fast land in standard because we didn't get that one in the set, and it feels extra bad. So definitely a lot of ways that we can utilize those lands in the new sets and into Pioneer. Also, I have an honorable mention that isn't actually like a land. It is Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines. I felt like it was kind of a shoe-in, kind of obvious that Elesh Norn would be in someone's top 5, so we're just going to talk about this one briefly, and then we're going to go over the rest of our top 5s. Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines, 4 and a white for a 4/7 Vigilance. You've probably heard about her. She's the only one you probably wanted to pull out of your packs, because I've seen all the variants and prices of this card, and let me tell you, have you seen the prices of Elesh Norn? Of all the variants and stuff online?
No.
You haven't? Okay, you might want to look it up.
For like 100 plus.
Yeah. There's
like
multiple variants over 100. At least they were on pre-release day. It was crazy. Anyways, it's Vigilance. It's a 4/7. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. And then permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponent's control to trigger. So we had talked about this card in the past. We're not going to spend too much time on it, but I see it being a player in standard and a player even in modern, because there's a few things I want to talk about this card that cannot get. There's a lot of things that can't get rid of this card in modern. In standard, you have a lot of different cards that can get rid of this. right? You have Go for the Throat, Infernal Grasp. You have a lot of white cards that get rid of this. There's Depopulate and Farewell in the format. So your Elesh Norn's not going to stick as well as it will in Modern. Because let me tell you, there's not much that gets rid of this that's played in Modern currently. Obviously, Lightning Bolt doesn't get rid of this. Unholy Heat doesn't even get rid of this. 7 toughness. The permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents you control to trigger is crazy because Fury can't get rid of this. If you like deal damage to this first, Fury can't. Let's see. What else? What else? The white evoke elemental still can't get rid of this. Whatever that's called, I forgot off the top of my head.
Solitude.
Solitude can't get rid of this. Leyline Binding can't get rid of this. The only thing that gets rid of this that's really played in standard, not standard, in Modern, is like Terminate. And so we might see the re-rise of Path to Exile in Modern, but just to deal with Elesh Norn, if people actually decide to play with this card. I don't see much else to deal with this. We don't talk a lot about Modern, but I think Elesh Norn will be a player in Modern. You have something to say, Michael?
I'm interested to see if it does find a home. I mean, I think what you're saying is correct. It's a super powerful effect if it aligns with your deck. There is that like Blink Aspiring Spike deck where you have I forget that one creature that like blinks things and it comes back and ends up you can get a +1/+1 counter for everything that it's like every time it blinks something. Yeah, Soul Herder from Modern Horizons.
Right.
So it might be like something pretty cool for that, but 5 is a lot, but I think it could be done. I think you could swing it. And then obviously in Modern there's ways to cheat out things and stuff like that. So the earlier you can get it, probably the better. So I think this would be pretty interesting. If it does find a home in Modern, it definitely will change. It'll definitely change the texture of Modern to a degree.
If the moral story is like if this finds a home, right? Because it could just never find a home and it's too expensive and no one ever plays it. But if it's ever played, then it even turns off creativity. We're turning off Archon of Cruelty. Like it does a lot of stuff in turning off other people's decks and supercharging your own. Leyline Binding exiles 2 things. So you might be playing Leyline Binding in your Elesh Norn deck, and all of a sudden you're supercharging your own deck. Anything that you want to say about this Airball? Are you playing this in standard, or did you find a home in it somewhere else?
Yeah, this is kind of weird. It's like the signature card of the set, and it doesn't really seem to me to be particularly good in Standard. It doesn't seem to me to be particularly good in Pioneer, and I'm willing to believe that it's very difficult to remove in Modern. I don't play Modern, but I'm not sure that matters, because do other decks really need to remove it in order to accomplish their game plan? I don't play enough Modern to know that one way or another. Does Elesh Norn coming down end the game, or is it just like very difficult to remove, but who cares?
I mean, there's some decks in Modern are like kind of don't care. Like you have Murktide Regent that just flies over this, but
it loses it has to be in play before this comes in, because then if you play Murktide, it's an ETB effect. So I think it does lose it because it says it enters the battlefield with +1/+1 counters. So
entering the battlefield with is different than an ability of a permanent controls to trigger. So Murktide will still get the +1/+1 counters.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, but also Murktide just can't get rid of this outside of drawing Brazen Borrower, and it only plays like 1 copy of that. So Elesh Norn being 4 power. Also, you have to think in Modern, everyone has like 16 life to start out with, unless you're like a monocolored deck or something, because there's all the fetch shocks and everything going on. So you really only need to attack with Elesh Norn like 3 times to win the game, and it's just a vigilance creature that just. I mean, I don't see the game ending, taking too long after Elesh Norn enters the battlefield, because it has such a big effect on your opponent, and your opponent just like can't get rid of this thing.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I hope it does find a home, because it'll make Modern interesting, I think.
Oh, for sure. I hope it finds a home too. So that's all we're going to talk about with Elesh Norn. Let's talk about Airballs first. And I'm going to have Airball do one. We're going to go through all of Airballs, and then all of Michael's, and then all of mine, so we each get a chance to talk about our top 5s. Go ahead and talk about your first one. That one is the Evolving Adaptive Airball.
Yeah, so number 5 on my list is Evolving Adaptive. For 1 green, you get a Phyrexian Warrior, which comes into the battlefield with an oil counter on it. It gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than Evolving Adaptive, put an oil counter on Evolving Adaptive. So it's basically Pelt Collector at home. It's a little bit worse than Pelt Collector used to be because you don't get trample once it reaches a certain size. But Pelt Collector was like a pretty important card in a lot of formats for a while there. It was if you're going to play an aggro deck in any format, you absolutely must have good 1-drop creatures. It has to pass the Savannah Lion test. So I'm hoping that the addition of things like Evolving Adaptive and like the other 1-drops that have Toxic bring aggro back into the format, because it'll help shake up the mid-range miasma meta that exists in Standard right now.
Yeah, additionally, I think it's important that it's greater power or toughness, which is kind of cool because, you know, you can kind of play with your deck in a way that, you know, you can slam down some things that have big booties, I guess, and that would still give it an oil counter. So that's kind of cool. It doesn't have to just be about the power. Most of the time, like when you have things like this, it's about power. So being an or case is kind of cool.
Right. I've experienced this. I was playing a mono green deck few days ago, and actually during the early access, and I played Evolving Adaptive, and on turn 2 I played the Scrap Gorger, the 2-mana 0/3 mana dork, and Evolving Adaptive grows when you play the 0/3, so that's super relevant. And the 0/3 ends up becoming a 3/3 for 2 when it has 3 oil counters on it. We're not going to talk about that one too much today, but it is a mana dork in the format, and it does grow the Evolving Adaptive. Also the 2-mana 1/3 that makes your lands into 3/3s. I forgot the name of that one. That's from a previous set, maybe Dominaria United something, but that one also
Destiny
grows.
Spinner?
No, not Destiny Spinner. It's a 2-mana 1/3 mana dork, but you can turn your lands into 3/3s. Anyway, it's in Standard, but it also evolves the Evolving Adaptive. So in that way, it's better than Pelt Collector. It might be better than Pelt Collector because if you play just an oil counter deck, then you can like start moving the oil counters around or getting extra benefits off the oil counters. But it not having trample is a big deal, especially if you're playing a mono green or Gruul aggro deck. We do have Copperline Gorge, and a lot of the green red cards deal with oil counters. There's a new 3-mana 4/4 that comes in with 5 oil counters, and you can remove oil counters to give it +2/+2 to end of turn. You can remove one to give it vigilance. You can even kill artifacts or enchantments with it, and that would go well in a Gruul aggro shell with Evolving Adaptive and oil counters. So I do like Evolving Adaptive. Is it good enough to make aggro good in the mid-range miasma that you called it? I'm not sure. It's kind of like a we'll have to see. But if aggro is good, it probably will have to do with this card, I think.
Yeah, I'm interested to see whether it's not just good at making aggro good, but whether it will make green good. Because right now green is far and away the worst card in Standard. And I think that even though this card is very powerful in a vacuum, it's not necessarily enough to make green good, and it might just not find a home for that reason.
Right. Okay, let's move on to your next card. It is Exuberant Fuseling. Talk to us about this one.
Yeah, Exuberant Fuseling, keeping with the 1-drop theme. It's for 1 red, you get a Phyrexian Goblin Warrior with Trample. It's an 0/1, and it gets +1/+0 for each oil counter on it. How does it get oil counters? Well, when it ETBs, and whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on it. Unlike most other cards that have this kind of text right now, this does not just trigger once per turn. This triggers every single time something like this happens. So I'm excited to see what happens with this deck in like the Rakdos Anvil decks, where you're sacrificing artifacts, where you're sacrificing creatures. God forbid you put this in Cat Oven or something. This thing can get huge, being like 7-9 power on like turn 3 or 4 if you have the nut draw. This could be terrifying, and I really hope it is. I would like those games to end sooner rather than later.
My thought is this might actually put red-black sacrifice in Pioneer like back on everyone's radar. This card having trample and being a 1-drop. Oh, and we get Blackcleave Cliffs, so you have like a almost guaranteed like turn 1 red or black source in that deck. This having trample, like it's have a hard time against mono green, and mono green's one of the most played decks in the format because of Karn Great Creator, and Exuberant Fuseling can really attack through almost everything your opponent can put in front of it. The only downside is it just gets chunk blocked by an elf. But I was playing in Standard today, and I played against an Exuberant Fuseling, and they had a couple of these things with blood tokens from Bloodtithe Harvester going off, with the with the Mishra's research desk sacrificing and coming back and sacrificing again, and a bunch of things dying. And one of these exuberant fuselings was an 8-1 with trample, and it was, I had to play a really expensive removal spell, a really important one, on just this 1-drop exuberant fuseling. I was like, wow, this card is amazing. So I really got to see the power of it going off. And Rakdos Expert over here, I keep saying it, but Michael, I mean, are you excited to play with this card? Are you playing this?
I mean, I am curious to put it in a Rakdos Sacrifice Shell for sure. I think it's a card that they don't deal with it right away, can get really big, and then it can be the thing that kills your opponent, or like even if it hits your opponent for 3 or 4, like that could be set up for you to win the game later. Like it is a good threat. You know, do I wish it had haste? Hell yeah. But
it's not gonna have haste.
Oh my god.
No.
But no, it's great. I think it's cool because it's kind of cool to play on turn 1 and your opponent sees it coming. It's just like,
No.
well, what do I do? Do I use my removal on this? It really puts your opponent in some hard decision making.
With Cat Oven, I can see this fuseling getting to like 13 power. Like, this thing's gonna be humongous.
Not thick, but
like it's gonna be. I mean, it's the opposite of thick.
angry.
That toughness isn't gonna get super high. It's gonna stay at 1.
No.
But this thing can be like a 13-1 trample. Like, you got to watch out for this card in Standard and Pioneer. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Airball, talk to us about Phyrexian Arena.
All right, so we've had the aggro cards on my list, and now we're moving into the mid-range. Phyrexian Arena. It's a reprint, 1 and 2 black. You get an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card. Sounds good. And you lose 1 life, which is whatever. And I think Phyrexian Arena is just like one of my favorite cards in Magic. It's not going to... Obviously, it's legal in a bunch of older formats already because it's a reprint. It isn't seeing play in Pioneer. I'm not sure whether that's because it's not legal or whether it's just not powerful enough to make the cut. Possibly both. But in Standard, Phyrexian Arena is this awesome way to gain resources when you're in aggro deck. Getting 2 draws per turn allows mid-range decks to like slant more towards an aggressive approach without being punished for not running cards that replace themselves immediately. And I also just love these double-edged cards, right? Like cards that give you benefits and hurt you at the same time. It's very black. It's very in keeping with that part of the color pie. It's my kind of Magic. I love it.
Yeah, I think this is awesome. Excellent, like, standard sideboard card for sure. Like in a control thing where they're slotting in everything to kind of kill your creatures. You know, a Phyrexian Arena definitely gives a control player like headaches because they're just like, they're not supposed to have a card draw, and you're just like essentially getting two cards a turn, which is that's some cards. That's some good card. Yeah, I don't know either if it was allowed or not allowed in Pioneer before this set dropped. But yeah, really excited to see what people do with it in Standard if there's a way to make it happen.
One thing I know for sure is you can't play this in Standard Best of 1 because you get run over by Mono Red every single match. It'd be super sad when you draw Phyrexian Arena. But in Best of 3,
what's Best of 1?
Oh yeah, it's a format. It's a format that people watch on YouTube for Magic the Gathering Arena.
Okay.
What's Magic Arena?
There's a very popular content creator, you know, Covert Go Blue, that that you know, is part of our team and everything, that plays Standard in front of like almost 200,000 people.
That's pretty cool.
So anyway, that's a big format, but in Best of 3, I can really see what you're talking about, Airball, with you get an aggressively slanted mid-range deck, flowing the cards in with Phyrexian Arena, using up your entire hand, but you're going to use up more than 1 card per turn and drown out your opponent with aggro. But also, there was a I don't know, it was Pro Tour like 6 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, that people were playing Argel's Bloodfast in their like black-red aggro decks, and in their like what was it, like blue-black decks and things like that. When that card was legal in Standard, and that card was a house, and everyone sideboarded that for control mirrors, for mid-range mirrors, and it was just everywhere, and it took over games with people having infinite cards in their hand. And Phyrexian Arena is kind of like in that vein. You did have to pay 2 mana and take 2 life for Argel's Bloodfast, and it flipped over at the end of the game when you got to like under 5 life or something. But Phyrexian Arena is kind of in the same vein. It's more mana to begin with than Argel's Bloodfast, but you don't have to keep pumping mana into it. so you just get that card flowing for free at the start of your upkeep every turn. So it is the Bob in enchantment form. Curious to see whether this makes sideboards in Standard and in Pioneer. I don't think it was legal in Pioneer before. Curious to see whether this makes the cut. But blue-white control decks where you would want Phyrexian Arena, and maybe in the mirror match, in the Rakdos mid-range mirror match, you might want a couple copies of this. Let's move on to the next card, and it's a good one. I don't know if mono white mid-range needed more removal in Standard, but here we are with Ossification. Talk to us about this one.
Yeah, Ossification, 1 and a white for 2 total mana. It's an enchantment. Enchant basic land you control. When it enters the battlefield, exile target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls until Ossification leaves the battlefield. So it's kind of an O-ring effect for 2 instead of 3. The downside is you need to enchant a basic land you control. And when I first saw this card, I thought, oh my god, this is going to go in Enigmatic Incarnation. It's just a 2-mana kill spell, better chain to the rocks. We're going to sacrifice it. We're going to use it to bring 3 drops into play. It's exactly what that deck wants. And then I realized it wasn't land with a basic type. It was a literal basic land, which made it significantly worse. Nevertheless, I am excited to see what this card does in Pioneer in blue-white control, because right now blue-white control does not have great answers to planeswalkers at on rate. And if you can fit enough basics into that deck, which a lot of players already were, even running like the 3-mana draw spell that discards a basic land, if you can run that many basics in the deck, then Ossification becomes playable, and it shores up one of the main weaknesses of the archetype. Might make me play blue-white control in Pioneer again. Not that you really need to twist my arm to do
that. I mean, there is Fateful Absence that people are playing, but in your control deck, you might not want people drawing extra cards. But what do you think about this, Michael?
I mean, Airball said everything there was. I was reading it, and I didn't know it was basic land that you control, and that is, yeah, it's not a basic type. I was about to be world there. I was like, we are really worried, because that's like, yeah, Chain to the Rocks. They had Chain to the Rocks in Standard. That's just like, damn.
Yeah.
That's hard to deal with. At least in the colors I like playing. But no, I mean, good solid card. They balanced it kind of well. And yeah, I mean, I know being on the other side of these type of cards, it's definitely a headache. So I could see it being really nice in the toolbox of those blue-white players.
I have started seeing Standard decks floating around that's mono-white mid-range, playing Elesh Norn and Ossification and Lay Down Arms. And a lot of the cards in that deck already have Enter the Battlefield triggers. Like the Spirited Companion is an Enter the Battlefield draw card. They already play the 2-mana 1/1 that when it enters the battlefield searches a plains, and then it can become a 3/3 lifelink later on by paying 3 mana if it has Coven. You know what I'm talking about? I forgot the name of that card off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Ambitious Farmhands.
Ambitious Farmhands. They already play that. So this kind of just slots in, and also is a double trigger with Elesh Norn. And usually the 2-mana cards like this usually target a creature with mana value 3 or less. This is any creature. Any creature, any planeswalker, and when you have Elesh Norn, this thing hits 2 things. So it's super powerful card, especially in mono white midrange, where you are almost guaranteed to have a basic land in your hand. And so you have 4 Ossification and 4 Lay Down Arms. Like, holy moly.
Yeah, hearing you say that just reminded me that you can actually get it back off Restoration by Gonjo.
You can get it back off of Restoration of Gonjo. It also plays that, the lore counters, the first lore counter is not an Enter the Battlefield trigger, I'm pretty sure. So you can't get double planes off of the Elesh Norn from Restoration of Gonjo, but you can still bring back Ossification and get rid of anything your opponent controls. That is enough to buff an already tier 1 deck in mono white midrange and Standard. So I don't think it makes the cut in Modern, because you can just fetch a basic land. Way easier to guarantee your basic land in Modern. So you never know, but Chain to the Rocks is definitely a good card to be playing as well. So let's go over to the last card for you, Airball. That card is the Eternal Wanderer. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I had to pick one of the planeswalkers, and I ultimately settled on Eternal Wanderer. It's 6 mana, 4 and 2 white for a legendary planeswalker with no type. Wanderer, one of the only planeswalkers with no type in Magic.
I didn't actually realize that.
Ability. Yeah, no name.
Weird.
Yep.
Static ability. No more than one creature can attack the Eternal Wanderer each combat. And then for loyalty abilities, you can +1 to exile up to one target artifact or creature and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. You can just 0 to create a 2/2 white samurai creature token. We've been down this road before, except it has double strike this time, which is pretty terrifying. Or you can -4, and note that Eternal Wanderer comes in with 5 loyalty, so you can do this right away. -4, for each player, choose a creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all creatures they control not chosen this way.
Straight up dirty.
Pretty violent. Like, this is a pretty insane Planeswalker. 6 mana is a lot to spend, but for what's essentially a board wipe on a Planeswalker stick, and for a Planeswalker that protects itself probably better than any Planeswalker ever printed, honestly. Like, this is not being able to be attacked by more than one creature, coming in with 5 loyalty and making a double striking token to protect it. That's insane. And you can even exile like your opponent's tokens too to just make them vanish. Like, that's pretty busted. I don't know if 6 mana is cheap enough for it to find a home anywhere other than standard or even in standard. But if it does, like, it basically ends the game against aggro decks on the spot.
I think it's gonna find a home in some other formats. It has to. Like, it is a 6 mana. If your opponent plays creatures, they lose the game. Like, it's that's the whole, like, not more than one creature can attack the Eternal Wanderer each combat. Like, how do you kill it? How do you kill it?
Your one creature better be damn good.
Yeah, I don't know how you kill the Eternal Wanderer. I don't know how.
I have an idea.
You get to choose the creature, right? It's not each player chooses a creature.
Yes, you choose both in the battlefield.
Yeah.
I have an idea of how to kill it. Ossification.
the deck that's playing that
and the deck that's playing it.
Yeah, what are you talking about? You don't have the creature.
I know.
You don't have it.
No.
What do you mean?
I have actually
probably going to need to kill the double striking token.
That's
honestly.
true. I've played my share of Eternal Wanderer. I played it in a couple decks so far, early access and also after early access. And I'm playing it in a deck that's based around a card that I'm going to talk about soon, which I'm not going to spoil yet. But you had the chance to play Eternal Wanderer, and let me tell you, chef's freaking kiss. This card, you're like, oh, sick 1/1 token, get rid of everything else. I'll keep my biggest creature. Or you can set it up to where you're like, Shield Drill on turn 4, whatever else on turn 5. Okay, cool. Wandering Emperor, I'll keep my only Shield Drill on the battlefield. You lose your whole board. Congratulations. Even if they like remove Shieldred, they probably can't even get rid of Eternal Wanderer. Like, it's kind of crazy that not more than one creature can attack it. So you can make the Double Striker, and if they can't kill the Double Striker on the spot, then how do they get rid of Eternal Wanderer? They just like can't. I've probably used the +1 on my opponent's things more than I've used it on my own things. Like, nullifying any creature token on the battlefield is pretty good for a +1. It's like basically +1 destroy target token or exile target token, or you get it at the beginning of that player's next end step. So if you blink your own creature, you get it on your next end step, which is right away basically. If you blink your opponent's creature, it just vanishes from the board until their end step, so they just like don't even get to attack with it. And it's kind of
feels
crazy.
like it has Oko syndrome, doesn't it? Like doesn't it feel like the kind of card that R&D was like not expecting to be used on opponents' creatures? It was like it obviously intended to be used on your own. But it might actually just be better.
In that specific way, Oko treatment. Yeah, if this was like 3 less mana, we'd be talking about Oko treatment, but you know.
Oh, not in terms of power level, just in terms of like that might have been an oversight in design.
Maybe, but like maybe not. I don't know. Like you can do crazy things with this. Like you can like exile Evolving Adaptive on your opponent's turn that your opponent controls, and it comes back with like only 1+1/+1 counter. So there's a lot of things you can do. You can reset your own oil counters if you have a creature that makes oil counters when it enters the battlefield. So like you can do a lot of different stuff with Eternal Wanderer, and it probably always stays in the battlefield once you resolve it, unless they have ossification or any kind of other way to deal with Eternal Wanderer. So going to be a hard cookie to crack once it enters the battlefield. That is for sure. That ends Airball's top 5. Let's go ahead and go into Michael's cards. Talk to us about Phyrexian Obliterator.
Oh, my little baby boy, my baby boy, Phyrexian Obliterator. No, Phyrexian Obliterator. Yeah, so it is black, 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 black. That's 4 blacks. For a 5/5 creature, Phyrexian Horror, trample whenever a source deals damage to a Phyrexian Obliterator. That source's controller sacrifices that many permanents. Yeah, there's definitely some fun, interesting ways to utilize this. I think we spoke in the past, one of the past episodes. There's a like fight spell thing that you can do that does something additional on top of it, which is really nasty. And could basically just like wipe your whole opponent's board, including their lands, if it ends up working out that way. Um, the black, 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 black is a steep price to pay as far as like you're stuck to mono color for mono black. I know mono black has kind of dipped in the standings, but this might be something that maybe can bring it back. I don't know, but it's more than anything. It is a card. It's a feeling. It's a feeling card. It's one of those ones. It's one of those things that like once you get a taste of what it does, you're gonna start trying to build decks and do whatever with it. And is it right? I don't know, but does it feel great when it does the thing? It feels really great. So, yeah, that's what I think about Phyrexian Obliterator.
Yeah, usually people playing mono black for Phyrexian Obliterator have been sneaking in all the green black lands to play fight spells, to have Phyrexian Obliterator fight something and then force the fight, and then your opponent is forced to sacrifice that many permanents. Usually Phyrexian Obliterator is just like an unblockable 5/5, which is still pretty good. But when your opponent does block it, they lose a whole bunch of permanents, so they're never going to block it. But they've been using some fight spells in the format to kind of force the interaction. We've seen Bushwhack go into decks with Phyrexian Obliterator. It can add a basic land from your deck to your hand in case you need an extra green or something, or just hit your land drop. But also later on in the game, it helps your Phyrexian Obliterator fight stuff. There's also Tail Swipe, which is pretty good. Which if you use it during your main phase, your creature gets +1/+1 till end of turn, but it's an instant speed fight spell. So that's kind of crazy. When your opponent goes to kill the Obliterator or something, you can just instant speed fight and they have to sacrifice all their stuff. Airball, have you played against Phyrexian Obliterator in Standard yet? Or, what are you scared of this card?
No, on both fronts. I have played against it in Historic. And my God, is Michael ever right that this card is just it's a lifestyle choice. It's just a wonderful feeling when the card does the thing. It's also, I love the double-edged nature. Like if someone casts Justice Strike on it, where it deals damage to itself, then the owner of Phyrexian Obliterator needs to sacrifice 5 permanents. But it also just is another one of these cards that you play and it shuts down aggro, right? Like we had the Wandering Emperor or the Eternal Wanderer. That shuts down aggro. You have Phyrexian Obliterator, they can't attack into it. There's another card in the set that I think we'll be talking about later that comes down and just the aggro can't attack into it. So if aggro doesn't have you basically dead to rights by turn 4 or 5, there are the tools to just shut them out completely if you want. And four black pips we've seen is not that hard with the mana bases that existed even in the last standard. Invoke Despair is a little easier to cast, but 4 black pips is not the end of the world in a format where black is just the best color.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if your opponent gets down a Phyrexian Obliterator, good luck. You have to draw into your your hard removal spells immediately. And there's a lot of good 4-drops now. There's Phyrexian Obliterator and Shieldred in that black deck, so might see that creep up into Standard even more than it already has. All right, moving on. Let's go for Capricious Hellraiser. Michael.
Yeah, so Capricious Hellraiser, 3 red, creature Phyrexian Dragon, 4/4. This spell costs 3 less to cast if you have 9 or more cards in your graveyard. It has flying, and then it says when this card enters the battlefield, exile 3 cards at random from your graveyard, choose a non-creature, non-land card from among them, and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. I don't know how well it's going to do in Standard, but in older formats like Historic or even I don't know what they're doing in Alchemy nowadays. I don't know if that's a format anymore. But like Pioneer and Modern, like there are some funny things that you can be doing, and you could build your deck in such a way. This is a I don't know if we talked about this in the podcast, but this is a card that requires you to build your whole deck in a certain way. And if you're not having to do that, then your deck is just really strong. But you definitely want to build your deck in a certain way so that you can utilize that ability, because then you can cast some pretty broken stuff as long as it hits the right 3. But there's ways to manipulate and do things like that. So I think it's one to look out for. As far as how powerful it is in standard, I'm not quite sure, but also this is another card that's like, if it does the thing, you're having a good time, and your opponent is definitely not having a good time.
Right. A couple things I want to say about this card is that Aspiring Spike put together 5 different decks in Modern because this card, Capricious Hellraiser, was his favorite card in the set, or he said it was might be the best card in the set. So he put together a bunch of brews, and he's still working on those decks. But that's a pretty high praise for this card from him. So we have that going for it. But there's a different thing about this card that I got destroyed by in the early access. Super destroyed. So they put Capricious Hellraiser in the graveyard with a Boros Reanimator deck, and then played the Invoke Justice card to bring Hellraiser back, put a bunch of counters on it, and then Hellraiser exiled Invoke Justice again, and then Invoke Justice was cast again, bringing back another Hellraiser, and then the Hellraiser triggered again, all on the same turn as like a Storm Hellraiser combo thing, and I got demolished. So I don't think you're casting this for triple red that cost 3 less if you have 9 or more cards in grave. I think you're trying to put this in the graveyard and then reanimating it, and then casting your reanimate spell back again with this. I think that's what you're trying to do, and you also just get a 4/4 flyer that casts spells for free. So, Airball, what do you have to say about this one?
Yeah, I think a lot of how good this card will be in Standard comes down to how well you can manage your graveyard and how reliably you can get it into play. So a Reanimator Shell is good, but there's a lot of great graveyard hate available in Colorless that will make it very hard. So those Reanimator Shells have not really broken through because Unlicensed Terrace is in every freaking sideboard, and it's just GG for a lot of these decks. You can also just keep your opponents from casting it fairly with Unlicensed Terrace, so that's another thing that you need to be able to deal with. And you also need to make sure that the card that you hit off Hellraiser is actually impactful on the game to be worth this, for the juice to be worth the squeeze. I remember playing Arcane Bombardment decks in Standard, and obviously this card is better than Arcane Bombardment, but one of the hardest things about that card was making sure that you hit the spell that you wanted to hit rather than some cantrip that you weren't just hitting Consider off of your off of your 6 mana enchantment. I don't know how many good ways there are to manipulate the graveyard right now. You don't have Escape, you don't have Delve, you don't have anything like that. I'm curious to see how often this card is actually good when it hits the board in Standard.
If this one last thing I'm going to say about this is, if this card gets broken, it's probably going to be in Pioneer or Modern, because it just has the extra tools to do so. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. And this is a spicy one. Encroaching Mycosynth. Oh my goodness. I'm curious to see what you have to say about this one, Michael.
Yeah, Encroaching Mycosynth, 3 and a blue artifact. It says 9 permanents you control are artifacts in addition to the other types. The same is true for permanent spells you control and non-land permanent cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. Yeah.
That's the scary part. That's the scary part.
Yeah. Not on the battlefield, right? Because if you're a graveyard, even things in exile, if that ever matters,
hand deck
count. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I don't know this. The reason why I picked it, I don't like artifact chads. I don't. They something about them. They're just not right. Their brains don't like the way they look at the world, how their eyes move, even the way they blink. It's all messed up. Anyway, but I know they're out there. I know they listen to us. You're fine. You're great.
Power Stones.
Anyway, this, when you have something that Magic has a long history of, a bunch of artifacts, and they do powerful things, and it changes the game state in such a, not game state, well, yeah, it does. It changes a big rule in the game that other than your lands, almost everything in the world is artifacts, and there's things that care about artifact counts and are cheaper because of artifacts or get powered up because of artifacts or XYZ. And if you make everything artifact, that it is doing something in such a big degree to your state of the game, not your opponent's, but your state of the game, that you could take a big advantage of. And so I'm not even trying to think about, oh, it goes into this deck, or this card's going to be great at it, or XYZ. It's just like, no, like this is fundamentally changing your side of the board when you play it. And so that, to me, that can seem scary or powerful. So that's why I put it on my list.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a card that's super playable right now in a lot of formats, Abrade. If you play Encroaching Mycosynth, I'm just gonna like abrade your non-artifact and just like I can kill anything you have, which is a huge downside of this card. There's like Beseiju that kills any artifact. There's a lot of artifact and enchantment hate, which does make all of your cards susceptible, no matter what they are, to any of those cards, which is like a super big downside. But the super big upside is that like Emery can bring anything back out of your graveyard, and that's super duper scary. There's also cards that look at the top X cards of your library and get an artifact to your hand that can get anything, and so that's also super scary.
I feel as a counterpoint though, the Abrades and the Beseijus, like I think this becomes a lightning rod for that. Like, because you don't want a chance like they're getting set up and you're like, oh, I'm just going to kill this thing that I think I care about right now. And then they still have access to this being such a big game state changer. So I think, to be honest, like the Beseiju or the Braid's going to be going towards this thing. At least that's kind of how I would process it, unless the decks are built in a certain way. But I'm just like, why don't you just hit this thing? Because like, yeah, everything becomes that, but now you did it for one card and they're probably going to get gassed up because this is still on the board.
Yeah, what's your first take on this, Airball?
My first take on it is like, oh, that's cool, and that's probably going to break something. But the more I think about it, the more I realize this card needs to thread a very, very small needle to see play in anything. Because most of the decks that are built around artifact matters things are already running a pretty huge density of artifacts, and this card doesn't affect them in any way if they're already artifacts. So so you're spending 4 mana, and it doesn't go in artifact matters hardcore synergy decks because it doesn't do anything in those decks. It needs to be in a deck where things care about artifacts and are willing to pay 4 mana and do otherwise nothing to make those artifacts to increase the amount of artifact synergy in the deck. And I feel like that's something that's better addressed during deck building than with this card. I don't really see a home for it. I don't know where you would put it.
I think it's a home that we just haven't discovered yet. There's so many undiscovered things. I really think that this card is just a part of some kind of infinite combo. Like you can even play the goblin in like Commander or whatever that dumps any artifact from your deck to the grave, and then it lets you dump any permanent from deck to grave because you have Encroaching Mycosynths in play. So there's probably some kind of crazy combo with this card, and that's probably where I see the best home for this.
Yeah, definitely Commander, I think, is probably the best place for it because you have to play 100 cards and you don't want all of them to be artifacts, but your Commander might care about artifacts in a big way.
Right.
I could see it there, but I don't really see it anywhere else.
All right, moving on to the next one. We have Phyrexian Vindicator. We alluded to this one a little bit earlier, but talk about this one, Michael. This one's scary.
Yeah. So Phyrexian Vindicator, white. Creature Phyrexian Horror 5/5. It's flying. If
why is it flying?
It has huge fleshy wings, but if damage would be dealt to Phyrexian Vindicator, prevent that damage. When damage is prevented that way, Phyrexian Vindicator deals that much damage to any target. This thing's pretty nasty. It does get to fly over anything, but if you do end up doing damage to it, depending what state of the game is, this can just be unblockable in a weird way because that might just kill you. Or, if you don't, even if you, let's say, Unholy Heat it or something in another format, or hit it with a lightning bolt or hit it with some sort of damage spell, that's not great. I don't know. I think it's just an interesting card, and I don't know what kind of ways you can do to abuse things like this, but it does seem like it seems like a cool card, and it's like Phyrexian Obliterator's like little brother. I think it's interesting to see what it does.
Yeah, I posted a poll, a question on Twitter when I first saw this card announced, and asked how many infinite combos there are with this, because there's probably so many of them, especially in Commander where the card pool's infinite. But I just thought about this while you were talking, Michael. When you have 2 Phyrexian Vindicators in play, it's not even legendary, but like say you copy this with Reflection of Kiki-Jiki or something, and then and then something damages this, you can keep bouncing them back from Vindicator to Vindicator over and over and over again, because it says any other target. It can't target itself, but if it targets another Vindicator, you just keep bouncing the damage back and forth forever.
Like, yeah, and then the judge comes over and tells you to stop it. Shoots you with a little spray bottle.
No. I mean, you can do that, but like if you had something that triggers when that would happen, or when that happens, then you can kill your opponent. And there could be something like that in Standard or Pioneer or Modern or something, where if you do have 2 of these out, it can be some kind of combo. Like this like feels like super combo card to me. But it's also a 4-mana 5/5 flyer that you can never attack into, and just if there's no answer to it, you just win the game, kind of like Phyrexian Obliterator. So Airball, what do you have to say about this one?
Yeah, this one has the misfortune of existing in a Standard meta where all the removal was white and black and not damage based. And a lot of the game is decided based on those single target removal spells, not like actual creature combat. So I think that this is going to have I don't know that this is going to have a great spot in current Standard, but it's an incredibly powerful effect that does just shut down aggro, right? Like attacking into this is suicide. What are you gonna do? And it's hard to even go super wide against it too, because it'll mow down 2 things. It'll deal its own 5 damage to whatever it blocks, and then it'll deal that damage, the extra damage, to another creature on the opponent's side of the board. This is a tough one to get through.
Right, and one thing I do want to mention about this is in mono white midrange in Standard, if you sideboard a couple of these things against any aggro deck you play against ever, green red aggro never beating you, mono red aggro never beating you. Like by the time you draw this card, they have to just bolt. They have to like lightning strike your face over and over again to win the game. Like they no longer can beat you.
No. Our hero returns. Questing Beast will come back.
Oh my goodness!
And one of the lines on Questing Beast: damage cannot be prevented. So
I guess
that's
Stomp
the
also.
Cold answer.
Like Stomp also.
Stomp also. Yep.
So I mean, outside of damage can't be prevented stuff, Phyrexian Vindicator out of the sideboard says you can't lose the game. Basically, it's basically a Platinum Angel or whatever it's called as a 4-mana card. So anyway, that one's super strong. We'll see how that one does in certain formats that you enjoy. We'll talk about the next one, and this is the last one for Michael. Talk to us about Tyvar, Jubilant Bowler. Brawler.
The Bowler. So Tyvar, Jubilant Brawler. I have to focus now. Legendary Planeswalker comes in with 3 loyalty counters. You may activate abilities on creatures you control as though those creatures had haste. It has a +1 on tap 1 up to 1 target creature, and it has a -2 mill 3. Then you may return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And the reason I only put this on here was in sacrifice things when your thing is tapped and you can't really do anything yet with it. But there's probably some cool other infinite combo stuff and all these cool things you can do. But my favorite card, my baby card, the card that I first bought into was Priest of Forgotten Gods, and being able to Priest of Forgotten Gods from the rip is just there is no downtime. I'm just priesting you, and then I can untap it. I don't know how you'd have that many creatures, but kind of sick. So I don't know. That's why I put it on this list, and I'm sure there's cool other things you can do with it. But being able to immediately activate it and then untap it and maybe activate it again is kind of cool. So
yeah, there's some real cool stuff.
Yeah, the actually with the sacrifice stuff, it's you may return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. So I mean, yeah.
Yeah, we talked about this card before. Talk about Exuberant Fuseling, right? You can bring back the Fuseling with this after they kill it. There's a lot of artifacts leaving the battlefield. You can untap whatever creature you want, use it again. Reflection of Kiki-Jiki, use it, untap the reflection, use it again. You can even use Reflection of Kiki-Jiki's ability on the same turn that it flips over because you have Tyvar in play. You can even use Blood Tithe Harvester the turn that it comes out when you have Tyvar in play. You can bring back the Blood Tithe Harvester. It triggers and makes a blood token, then use the Blood Tithe Harvester as soon as it comes back. Even in Modern, this card is seeing the most play because you can tap Devoted Druid for green and then untap it, and then tap it again for green mana, and then untap it with Tyvar, and then do it again, and you can make actually infinite mana with a different white card combined with Devoted Druid to make infinite mana, and then you can either attack your opponent with Lair of the Hydra for game with like an infinite Lair of the Hydra, or you can cast Walking Ballista for X equals a million and dome your opponent in the face with it. And also Tyvar lets you have a lot of redundancy by bringing back your combo pieces out of the graveyard, since both combo pieces in Modern, including Devoted Druid, are both 2 mana. So this card does so much stuff in making that deck probably one of the top tier 1 or 2 or 3 decks in Modern again. So a lot of things this can do. I was playing it in Standard today. It seemed awesome. I even played a couple cards to mill with this because it mills 3 cards, then returns 1. So I played like the underdog in my deck as well to mill with this. So Airball, what are your first thoughts on Tyvar? Are you playing it in Standard or Pioneer? I actually thought about playing Jund instead of Rakdos just for Tyvar for how good it is with Blood Tithe Harvester and Reflection of Kiki-Jiki. What are your thoughts, Airball?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think this card should be named Tyvar, Fable of the Mirror Breaker's best friend. It's practically built to get Fable of the Mirror Breaker going 1 turn sooner. It plays so well with all the cards that Fable of the Mirror Breaker already plays super well with. And being able to like run it multiple times with the +1 ability is just kind of insane. I don't think in Pioneer that it's going to be worth the splash of green mana. Like the lack of, like Rakdos's main draw in Pioneer, one of them is that it's just so damn consistent. Introducing inconsistency in the form of the green splash might be a little too much unless there's something else you're willing to put there. But in Standard, my god, how many times have you known that you need to kill a Fable of the Mirror Breaker and you at least get 1 more turn because it was summoning sick when it flipped?
Mm-hmm.
You don't get that anymore with this. Fable of the Mirror Breaker flipping effectively 1 turn sooner is insanity. This could be a big player in Jund and Standard.
Right. The fact that you can use Reflection and then untap it and then use it again is absurd. So there's some massive power level upgrade to that for Jund in Standard. So super excited about that. Awesome card as your last card, Michael. So let's go ahead and go into my cards. I have to name this card because I love Niv Mizzet Reborn so much, and it must be in my top 5. It's Atraxa Grand Unifier. It's 7 mana total, 3 and a green and a white and a blue and a black. That's a lot to say. But it's a legendary creature, Phyrexian Angel. It's a 7/7 flying vigilance, death touch, lifelink. Can we say questing beast? When Atraxa Grand Unifier enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library exactly like Niv Mizzet Reborn. For each card type, you may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Artifact, creature, enchantment, instant, land, planeswalker, and sorcery are card types, but it also includes 1 card type that we don't have yet, and Magic's gonna introduce a brand new card type, Battle. We don't know what it does yet, but it's called Battle, and this card specifically mentions that card type. But I have played this card. It's my favorite best of 3 deck to play right now, just Atraxa. And I'm hard casting it, I'm reanimating it. My sorceries are like sweepers and reanimate spells for Atraxa because I have a small reanimate synergy. I have some instants which are removal spells, and Faithful Mending is my other instant. I have enchantments like Wedding Announcement and Restoration of Eiganjo. I have a bunch of creatures. You play Planeswalker, so I'm playing Wandering Emperor, and I'm playing the Eternal Wanderer, the one that you were talking about, Airball. So just a bunch of cards that you just get to play, and this card gets 4 to 6 cards every single time it enters the battlefield. And the Eternal Wanderer can exile this, and it comes back on your end step, and it triggers again, looking at the top 10 and adding a bunch of cards to your hand again. So basically, once you resolve this card, you win the game, similar to Niv Mizzet Reborn. I love big mana decks that do awesome things. Airball, what do you think about Atraxa Grand Unifier?
Well, one thing that irrationally bothers me about it is that you can't live the Niv Mizzet dream, which is flipping 10 cards and getting to put all 10 of them into your hand. The maximum you're ever going to get off Atraxa is going to be 8, because those are the 8 types that the card names. Whereas Niv Mizzet, you could hit one of each of the 10 guilds
Right.
and put all 10 into your hand. So that's disappointing just on its face. Drawing 8 cards probably still good enough if you manage to pull it off, though. Pretty cool. 4 colors is a lot. Getting hit by Disdainful Stroke kind of sucks, and it's kind of like this weird. You kind of have this weird problem in Standard where like there are a lot of cards that effectively win the game for like 7 or 8 mana, but like they just get hit by Disdainful Stroke or Make Disappear or any random counterspell, and so if they touch the board, you win, and if they don't, you lose. And most of the good decks in the format right now, with the exception of like Mono White, are running that interaction. But if we do move towards more non-blue decks, then this card just wins the game on the spot. Just make it to turn 7.
Yeah, I mean, this includes artifacts. I didn't mention my artifacts that I was playing before, but I'm playing a Celestis, and I'm also playing 4 of the green artifact that's actually a treasure, but it makes a 1/1 and it can draw 3 cards if you pay 5 mana into it. That one's been pretty good. You can bring it back with Restoration of Iganjo and ramp again. There's a lot of ramp you can do to Atraxa to play it ahead of schedule. But Michael, what are your first thoughts about Atraxa?
Same vein as the airball. Like, it's a lot of mana, but I mean, if you're able to play it, it's great. Yeah, and all this keyword soup on it is pretty good. But yeah, hopefully you can cheat it out. Yeah, I think if you can cheat out or accelerate your mana towards this is definitely something that is scary, and it's no, yeah, I think that's the card. It's a big mana
Big
effect
scary thing.
Yeah.
My thing is like, why does this card have Death Touch? Like, what's gonna block this? Like, I don't know. What are you gonna do? Quad block it, and then with a bunch of flyers, it also has flying, so it's not like you're blocking this with much. And then it has Death Touch. I don't know. Like, so it's just an irrelevant piece of text, but I guess it's part of the flavor with it being black. But anyway, let's go ahead and go on to my next card, and I love this one. It's Voidwing Hybrid. This is probably one of the most abusable cards that I've seen in a while out of a new set. It's a creature, Phyrexian Bat. It's a 2/1 blue-black flyer with Toxic 1. When you proliferate, return Voidwing Hybrid from your graveyard to your hand. So you can discard this card, like Liliana of the Veil, and then add it back when you proliferate with like a Vraska, with a new Vraska that's 0 to proliferate, like draw a card, lose a life, proliferate. There's a bunch of blue cards and black cards that all proliferate. So you can just totally abuse bringing this back to your hand, let alone having more than one of these in your graveyard. It's just, I don't even know what to say about it. Like, this is just the supreme amount of card advantage that just keeps flowing to your hand over and over and over. My opponent, when I was playing this, had Liliana of the Veil in play on their board, and then I just kept discarding Voidwing Hybrid, and I had like 3 Voidwing Hybrids coming back from my graveyard to my hand every single turn, because I was just utilizing discard to discard that for myself, discarding it from my opponents, playing one, chump blocking with it, proliferate, add all 3 back. It was kind of crazy. I mean, there's so many things you can do with this. Airball, what do you think about Voidwing Hybrid?
Yeah, my first instinct is this is a little small ball, right? Like it's a 2/1 flyer for 2, fine. And you need to proliferate a lot to get any further value out of it. And I have not seen evidence that there is an actual good proliferate deck yet. If there is, and it lives in blue-black, and blue-black has nothing else to be doing, then yeah, sure, I think this is fine. But it'll take some convincing for me to think that this card is any good.
Michael?
I mean, yep. Airball. I'm following Airball's lead today, but same kind of thing. It's just
Good idea.
Yeah.
Terrible idea.
Great idea. Great idea. You know, sometimes the Rakdos and the Azorius player can see eye to eye on things. Let's see. No, yeah. If you're able to get it back to your hand a lot, that's good. You know, if it's doing chump duty, I don't know if that's like where it wants to be. Toxic is certainly on this, and maybe you can win via toxic stuff and proliferation. So that's really good. But I don't know. I think if it, I'm trying to think about like, I'm just happy it's a 2/1 and it's a flyer. If it didn't have the 2/1 and flying, If either of those were off, I would be like kind of off of it. But if it works, it's a super fun card. And the one thing I do like about it too is the artwork kind of looks like Baleful Strix in a way.
It does. I think they were trying to go for that vibe.
Yeah, so that's the vibes. The vibes are there. I will say that's the good thing I will say about the card is the vibes are there.
No death touch and no drawing the card, but I mean, adding it back from your graveyard to your hand is massive.
Yeah, the good parts.
Yeah. I mean, adding this back to your hand doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but of course the things I said before are just a massive flow of card advantage. And the card I'm really talking about, it's pretty difficult to proliferate every turn, unless you have the Vraska. Vraska Betrayal Sting can make any creature into a token with the -2, and it actually proliferates every single turn, unless your opponent gets rid of it somehow. And it's pretty hard to get rid of because it turns your opponent's creatures into treasures. So anyway, just one of cards that I've been playing around with that has really impressed me. Moving on to my next card here. It is Vindictive Flamestoker. This card is a 1-mana 1/2 creature Phyrexian wizard. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Vindictive Flamestoker. You can pay 6 and a red, so 7 total mana, sacrifice Vindictive Flamestoker, discard your hand, then draw 4 cards. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each oil counter on Vindictive Flamestoker. I'm trying this card in my Rakdos midrange deck in Pioneer. I'm trying this card in my Izzet Prowess deck in Modern. And every time you get to resolve this, it is absolutely bonkers. And you're like, well, I mean, it's 7 mana, right? When are you ever going to get to resolve this? This is a lightning rod for removal also. So your opponent kind of has to get rid of this. If this thing has like 3 or 4 counters on it, just like throughout the game, you cast Vindictive Flamestoker turn 1, turn 2, you go like Thoughtseize, put an oil counter on this, Fatal Pusher thing, put an oil counter on it. All right, go ahead and stomp this, put an oil counter on it, cast Fable the Mirror Breaker, put an oil counter on it. And then all of a sudden this thing has 4 oil counters on it, and your opponent is forced to get rid of this unless you're going to like play the last 2 cards in your hand and draw 4 cards. It's absolutely a lightning rod necessary to get rid of. And of course in Modern you have a bunch of free spells, especially in my Prowess deck. You have Mishra's Bauble at 0 mana. You have the Phyrexian mana pump +2/+2 card that puts a counter on this, Lightning Bolt, the whole 9 yards, right? In Modern, it's a lot higher power level. You can draw 4 cards with Vindictive Flamestoker as early as like turn 2 or 3 of the game. So that is obviously very powerful. What are your first impressions on this, Airball?
Yeah, I mean, this card reminds me a ton of Bomat Courier. It's the same effect. Discard your hand and probably draw 4 cards. Bomat Courier, by the time you were cracking it, was usually probably about 2, 3, 4 cards. Except it's a lot easier to achieve that effect than it is with Bomat Courier. Bomat Courier needs to get in. It needs to actually attack. This one doesn't. This one just needs you to cast Opt, Consider, whatever, and you're doing that all the time anyway. And especially in like a Madness Shell, which is like my dream for this card, you discard your handful of Madness cards and
draw 4
and get to cast them all and then draw 4. Yeah, no, this card it makes me feel some kind of way. I like it.
What are you doing with this card, Michael? Probably doing something spicy.
I mean, probably, you know, if what is that? The Arcanist? Dreadhorde
Arcanist, yeah.
And Vindictive Flamestoker, they like holding hands and you know, trouncing through the Rakdos circus lands, of course. But no, I think, you know, maybe I'm trying to figure out the average of the card is like 4 for 4, right? You use 4, you know, you pay 4 to draw 4, which is super good, you know? So I think maybe that's kind of where it's still really solid. Yeah, I think if you're able to do the 4 for 4 or 5 for 4 or 3 for 4, like that's a sweet spot. So like you're drawing, and yes, you're discarding cards, but you're drawing 4 cards.
Oh, you're definitely discarding nothing with this. Like either you're discarding Madness cards, or you're discarding like a card. Like this is instant speed also. Like I've used this in my upkeep for 1 mana with 0 cards in hand, drawn 4, then drawn for turn for 5 cards. Like this card is actually insane, I think.
It doesn't even matter if you discard the cards. Like it doesn't. You're drawing 4 new cards. Like
right.
Chances are 2 of those cards are not great for the situation or something. It's like, I don't know. Even if you discarded 5 cards to draw the 4, like those are probably 5 cards you probably didn't need, and that's why you're activating this ability. It doesn't matter how much cards you're discarding. Like if you're clicking this, it means you need 4 fresh cards, which is sick.
Yeah. One thing I do want to say as a little caveat of cards like this is what is the floor, right? The floor is I draw this on turn 11 and I play it. Is it good, right? And in standard, there's so many lands in the deck, and there's like no fetches, to where you're gonna have like 11 lands in play, and you're just gonna cast this and immediately use the 7 and draw 4. So it's like an 8. It's like top deck late game 8 mana draw 4, which isn't the best thing ever, but in standard, that is definitely not bad. You know,
I mean, I'm thrilled to cast Memory Deluge for 7, and that only gets me 2.
Oh yeah, this thing draws 4 cards. So I mean, I can go on and on about this card. I'm trying it in so many decks. I have like foil borderless ones, 8 copies of them. I'm just in love with this card. Anyway, moving on to the next one. That one is Minor Misstep. This one is more of a card for Modern and maybe Pioneer, probably not. But I see this more as a counterspell for other removal spells. If it's like kind of like a Tamiyo Safekeeping, but with a little bit better upside. This is a 1 mana instant Minor Misstep, counter target spell with mana value 1 or less. So this can counter free spells, of course. That's not relevant in standard, but of course relevant in Modern. There's so many free spells in Modern, between let's see, there's a free counter spell in Modern, there's Crashing Footfalls in Modern, there's Living End in Modern. Those are all cast for free. There's Mishra's Bauble, which is free, not to mention all the 1 mana cards like Ragavan. When your opponent like top decks and dashes it in, you just counter it. It can counter anything. It's any target spell, not non-creature spell like you're used to with some cards like this. You can counter so many different cards and so many different matchups and decks that this is so high on the list for me because of its Modern playability. In Standard, probably not at all, unless you really want to counter your opponent's cut down or like Duress or something. Maybe there's a 1 mana card you want, but probably not playable in Standard. Trying to find a way to see if this is good in Pioneer, but I don't think it's good in Pioneer unless there's a super polarizing matchup that uses a 1 mana or less card. But this is more of a Modern shout out for me and being a very good card in that format. What is your first impression of Minor Misstep, Airball?
Oh, well, I'm not going to say too much about this card because I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a Modern card. I don't think there's really much that this card counters that Spell Pierce doesn't do a better job of countering in Standard and Pioneer. And this card has a much, much, much lower floor than Spell Pierce does in those formats. So I'm willing to say that it will be bad in those two. I am not smart enough or experienced enough to say what will happen in Modern. I'm interested to hear what Michael has to say.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
It's me, Michael.
Hey, what's up?
Yeah, I don't know, because like Spell Pierce is good, and it's already doing so much heavy lifting in Modern. I don't know, and it can hit stuff that isn't 1 mana or less. So unless some metas start pulling towards like a certain way, then we're not playing this card. But I think it's a sideboard card. I definitely know it's a sideboard card, and I feel like it's very meta dependent. If Murktide is doing well and some of the Cascade decks are doing well, then this is something that we can play.
Yep.
However, the one thing about Modern is there's 50-11 decks, and you can come across 50-11 of those decks any given Wednesday, Friday, tournament, whatever. So unless you are at your local meta and there's a whole bunch of effects that are 1 or less mana that people are playing, then yeah, play this. But I think Spell Pierce does a pretty good job at making sure it's open to many things and not just 1 mana spells. So
right. I think where this takes the cake over Spell Pierce and Flusterstorm, because remember that one's in Modern too, and because Spell Pierce and Flusterstorm are like the main cards to play against Living End and Crashing Footfalls, and your opponent can play around those by just making a couple more land drops and then playing the cards. Whereas with Minor Misstep, it just hard counters it. So that's the only other thing I have to say about it, is it's much better as the game goes along, and not as always being as good as Spell Pierce and Flusterstorm is when they have it exactly on curve. But Minor Misstep is just all the time. So that's the shout out I have for this card. And I just had to put it on the list, even though it's not relevant for Standard and Pioneer, just because of how good I think it will be in Modern. Let's go ahead and go over to my last card, and that is Venerated Rot Priest. I had to put this on here. It's taking Standard best of 1, by storm, no pun intended, because you can really storm off with this card with toxic counters, but it also makes a deck in Modern much more playable than it used to be, which is Infect. But let's talk about it. Venerated Rot Priest is a 1 for a 1/2 Phyrexian Druid, toxic 1. Whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell, target opponent gets a poison counter. So super relevant, especially in Modern. I'm not going to talk too much about Modern, but usually in Modern, you have to, in the Infect deck, actually attack your opponent and deal combat damage. So there's a lot of things that are unblockable that you play, and there's a lot of things that pump up your things so that they're harder to block. But with this, you don't actually have to attack to deal damage, to deal poison damage. You just target your things. A lot of the things that you do against Infect is to just target kill your opponent's creatures, and if you can do that over and over again, you're probably going to win the game. Not so fast against Venerated Rot Priest. You target it, and then you can just protect your own card. They get 2 poison counters just from that one interaction, let alone having more than one of these on the board. They'll take 4 poison counters, so they're almost halfway dead just on that interaction if you have double Venerated Rot Priest in play. In Standard, it's super scary because there's a card that was never ever played before, which is March of Burgeoning, I don't even know what it's called, the Green March that no one ever played ever. And when you have a Venerated Rot Priest on turn 1, and then you play the Green March on turn 2, exiling a green card from your hand and holding up interaction, you have 2 Venerated Rot Priests on the board, and you targeted the Rot Priest to get another Rot Priest, right? So you have 2 Rot Priests now, and you can play March of Swirling Mist to target a bunch of Rot Priests you control and phase them out, but each individual instance of the spell counts as an instance. So today, I had 3 Rot Priests in play, and had and played the blue March of Swirling Mist, and opponent took 9 poison damage with that 1 card interaction. So absolutely crazy. I see this making a wave in Standard for sure. Airball, what do you think about Venerated Rot Priest?
Yeah, it's not good. It's not even in Standard. But when you were talking about that, it reminded me of that Goldspan Dragon deck with Show of Confidence, the one that just sort of like masturbated for a little while and just cast like Big Score and Unexpected Windfall over and over again, and then just stormed off for 10. Except instead of like 10 Goldspan Dragon triggers, it's just you lose the game if you could pull off something like that. Obviously, that's not going to be good here, but I couldn't get it out of my head. I think that this is a really cool card. It makes me wish that there was like a better answer to poison in Standard, because I don't remember looking through the standard spoiler and seeing any really good answers to having poison counters put on you.
There's not.
This has like all the markings of a very difficult card to interact with that will sometimes just kill you super quickly, and you're going to get kind of pissed about it, but there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, I think those scenarios, the scenarios can sometimes be rare, but yeah, if you can't deal with this and they have, protection and all that stuff, then you do die from it. And if they have it, they got it. Like it's a card that, it's definitely taking advantage of another win condition that your opponent may have really soon in the game, and it's just like, well, just time to wrap it up and go home. Like,
yep.
So
yeah, I mean, it's happened to me where I was so concerned with getting rid of my opponent's Rot Priest that I forgot that this thing when it deals combat damage, also gives you a toxic, and then just like lost to them attacking. So,
yeah,
like if you don't put a blocker in front of it, it also gets to do an additional toxic just by attacking you. So, I mean, this can really get out of hand. The one thing I do have to say about this card in Standard is that the decks that will play this will do like hardly anything when this card's not in play. So they're going to play like a Ledger Shredder or like an Ivy, and then you're going to deal with that, and they're going to protect their Ivy, but then they don't have Rot Priest, so they're not actually dealing you toxic and killing you. So it's kind of like a back and forth of like when they have Rot Priest and the card that the March that gets a second Rot Priest, if they don't have like that turn 1, turn 2 play, it's going to be a lot harder for them to win. So you kind of have that in the back of your head. Also, it's easy to not target this card in Standard right now because there's Liliana of the Veil, there's Invoke Despair, there's also the new Shield, which is Edict. There's a lot of cards that kind of edict the Rot Priest away that you can play if this deck ever becomes a huge thing. So anyway, that is all for our 15 cards. If you do have any other cards that you do want us to mention or do an honorable mention, or maybe even do another episode about, let us know in the comments over on YouTube, or let us know on Twitter at Nuts and Bolts Pod. Is there anything else you want to say about any other cards? Airball, Michael, any last thoughts, last words about some new cards in the set?
Not from me. I think that it's kind of telling that all 5 of us came up with our own lists independently, and we each came up with 5 separate cards.
I know.
There's a lot of cool stuff in this set that all does different stuff, and one of them, like just the shotgun method, one of them is probably going to be good. So I'm excited to see which one it turns out to be.
Nothing from me other than Glissa Sunslayer. I hope that's a good card because I heard that that's had a history or a past for lots of people who used to play Magic back in the day. So it'd be cool if that card saw play and did some stuff.
Yes, I do love Glissa, especially you get to draw a card every turn. It's the first strike death toucher. Like, it's basically unblockable. Like, there's a lot of things I can say about Glissa. It's super good. But anyways, thank you so much to everybody for listening, especially those of you who made it this far. You're the real ones. Make sure to give us a follow and see our next episodes. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at Nuts and Bolts Pod, and we will see you in the top 8.
Get away.
Don't all talk at once.